What can I say about Dr. Michael Russell that you can't get out of his extensive biography and experience? And we've listed some of it there, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that little of what you've seen here today wouldn't have happened without his support and leadership. As a military leader, veteran, family man, family to Delisa Russell, our MVPN person, and Miss Tennessee, Madeline, just had a birthday, right? And is working for vets wherever she's at. I could go, I won't go on because he might, but I'm very grateful for this support, and I think we've got the right person to close this out. Don't run off when Dr. Russell is through, though. We're going to take a very short break. We'll put some chairs out here, and as many of our guests have the appetite for it, then we will ask all the many questions that we've gotten. We've got a lot of them, we probably can't get through all of them. At this point, though, if you do have to leave, or if you just do leave, the box is no longer a question box, so you don't have to work through those later, but it is a survey box, so if you fill out the survey, put in that box, you can take a tank. It is our tank speeds coming.
Okay, so I want to talk to you today for a few minutes about moral injury, which I've been interested in for a couple of years, ever since I got to the VA. I was an Army psychologist for 27 years. I was the chief of psychology at Fort Hood, at Fort Bragg, at Fort Bliss. And I was kind of doing what I thought was the right thing to do. And I show up at the VA, and they're doing something really completely different. And I was trying to figure out, how's this PE thing supposed to help people? Because they were really looking at the problem very, very differently than I was. And when I came across the topic of moral injury, I had the epiphany, okay, this is the piece that's missing. This is the piece they're not paying attention to. This is probably the next big thing that we need to look at. And you have to look at the history of how PTSD became PTSD to realize how they're missing this piece. And of course, this is brought to you by the Center of Excellence and the largest research lab in the VA, which is located by dint of Congress in Waco, Texas. And please do come up and visit us if you haven't been there. We are about 70 people now. We're headed for 100. Okay, so Perry has kindly shared his opinions with me about moral injury. And it is true, the snake oil salesmen are out there. The snake oil salesmen are broadening the definition of moral injury, and when it gets so broad that it really starts to lose any explanatory value, it starts to lose its meaning. And so what I want to do today, one of the things I want to do today is rein it in a little bit and show you how we're defining it and how we're looking at it. And so we can make it a clinically useful topic and hopefully a diagnosis. See, the thing is, it's not all PTSD. The VA is just, forget the 500 pages in the DSM, no matter what you've got, when you go into the VA, they're going to call it PTSD. I actually, when I retired, I had to go see the shrink, right? I had to go see a psychologist as part of the exam, right? And I went into her and I said, I do not have PTSD. And I got my rating back from the VA. I was rated for PTSD. But I actually went into the shrink and said, I don't have it. Okay, all right. I guess it wasn't convincing. Okay, here's how I see it. A lot of bad things can happen to you when you go into a war. But, 3 ways that things go bad are these ways. You can suffer some kind of organic change to your brain, neurological. I'm a neuropsychologist, and these can have dramatic effects on you, like suicide. Suicide we were talking about before. Do you know if you have 3 concussions in your history, your suicidal preoccupation increases tenfold? That the reason why we're getting all these CTE brains in the brain banks is because these people commit suicide. And so the symptoms that come from these organic changes, a lot of times they look a lot like PTSD. They self-medicate with alcohol, they have suicidal ideation, they get depressed. But really, you go and look at the brain and it's full of tau. The tau proteins are taking over the brain. So there's that, and we were missing that too, because we're all focused on the psychological stuff. And there's the thing that everybody is paying attention to, and that is something bad happens to you. You get freaked out by it. You develop an anxiety, fear kind of reaction. You feel unsafe. Okay? And then there's this whole part. This whole part where you do things or you fail to do things in a combat situation or in life. And afterwards you look back on that and you have guilt, regret, you feel unworthy to rejoin society. This is the first article, and it's a really good article. A social worker wrote it. Sarah Haley in Boston. When the patient reports atrocities. This is 1974. This is before PTSD was a thing. We were talking about moral injury. What do you do when somebody comes into your office and their presenting complaint is they did something really terrible? So, PTSD is things that happen to you. You were a victim of things that happened to you. Moral injury is things you did, including acts of commission and omission. So, for example, enabling or failing to stop bad things that are causing you guilt and shame. Now, betrayal is this gray area topic, okay? Because betrayal by your authority figures, maybe it's sent on a suicide mission or just, people lying to you. If it causes guilt or shame, it seems to work, but then there's this whole gray area that was a really red herring for us, which was military sexual trauma, like if you are raped by a superior, like your first sergeant rapes you, okay, is that moral injury? No, that's a small part of it, because really, that's what PTSD was really set up for, is that kind of primary trauma assault upon yourself, right? So we just actually are publishing a paper on that where we factor analyzed it and showed that MST flows into PTSD, it doesn't really flow into moral injury. It's basically, we are all killer apes under a thin veneer of civilization, and that civilization can be torn away easily, and that's a very shocking thing to find out. And once that person sees the other side of themselves, they have a hard time fitting back into their old shell. They can't reintegrate, and they feel like they don't belong. I have a bunch of notes to myself, which I'm going to forget to say if I don't look at my pages. So, I'm just a little young for Vietnam. I started ROTC in 1976, and of course Saigon fell in 1975. But a very famous psychologist, I was at the University of Washington, and Elizabeth Loftus was my mentor. She's the famous person about human memory and eyewitness testimony. This is where she got famous. You can't trust eyewitness testimony. It's bullshit. Right. And she decided I would be a really good police psychologist. So she hooked me up with the Washington State Patrol psychologist who's actually wore a uniform. And he explained how great it was to be a police psychologist. And I just said, yeah, I'm going to be a police psychologist. That's what I want to be. So when I graduated, I actually became King County Sheriff's Deputy Michael Russell. And everybody, so that's how I got to go to Vietnam, because everybody that trained me, everybody that I worked for, they were all Vietnam vets. And they were all crazy Vietnam vets. And I always worked the night shift. I worked from 11 to 7 because that's where the action was. That's where things were happening. People got drunk and people got rowdy and the social workers went home. And so I discovered that around 2 in the morning, people would tell you stories. People would tell you things that they don't commonly tell Dr. Russell, but they told Officer Russell. Many of these guys went into the police line of work because they didn't really want to leave combat. They wanted to keep fighting the war. And so I also do believe, by the way, that law enforcement is a great area of focus for moral injury. It should be one. So anyway, I started my career as a psychologist with some experience. And, you know, Vietnam, I don't have to spend too much time with this guy, but David Hackworth. How many people know Apocalypse Now, the movie? Right? Oh, good. This crowd. See, I just talked to some grad school students at Texas A&M, and none of them had seen the movie. Oh, damn. So anyway, he's the Charlie Don't Surf dude in real life. He was based on that guy. And this is from his book, Steal My Soldiers' Hearts. And Steal My Soldiers' Hearts was about this commando team, this Tiger team, that he had formed, this hardcore battalion Tiger Force, right? And they're really actually accused now of the worst war crimes, some of the worst war crimes in the Vietnam War. But these are the guys that made the necklaces out of human eaters. These are the guys that, you know, a lot of Vietnam movies you've seen, things like this. Okay, so you're people who do things like this. And what happens? When you do something at 19 because of peer pressure and being caught up in the moment, and by the way, man, every war I've been to, and I've been to most of them, you know, since that one, I missed that one, people talk the same way in the war. You know, in Iraq, I want to kill them all. I want to kill every single one of them, you know. When you do something at 19 because of peer pressure, being caught up in the moment, it might take a while until that thing bothers you. Peer pressure is a powerful thing. And the other thing is your moral sense grows with age. This actually came out on my Ballard High School Facebook page, and I just got it, you know, because this lady who was a couple years in front of me in high school, and she pointed, you know, she was a Native American, the only Native American at the high school. And people just treated her terribly, evidently. And you're horrible children. I tried to kill myself because of your cruelty. Your cruelty affected me a lot, but look at me now. She went on, had a good life. Okay. Over 50 people, these people that were cruel to her in high school, and, you know, then wrote, say, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Hey, I didn't realize this was going on, or, you know, they just apologized, okay? Because they grew up. Okay, but these 17-year-olds that were mean to this person because she was browner than they were, and they didn't know what to do with the Native American, what's the average age of the guy in Vietnam? Was 19 years old. They're only a year older than these guys, right? Okay, your brain, your frontal lobes aren't fully formed until 25. That's why you can't drink until you're 21. Okay, so it's not that surprising to me that when people are given automatic weapons and dropped into strange countries to meet friends and influence people, that things sometimes go off the rails. Dehumanizing enemies is absolutely vital if you want to kill them. It's hard to kill a human being. It really is. It's hard to kill another person. You know, they did a study after the Korean War and saw that in most combat engagements, a rifle platoon, half the troops don't even fire their weapons. They don't even pull the trigger. And then of the people that do pull the trigger, a lot of them aren't aiming. Okay? And do you know how many bullets were fired in Vietnam per person killed? How many bullets? Do you know the number?
85.
50,000. 50,000 bullets were fired for every bad guy killed. And Warfare 101 is you dehumanize the enemy, okay? If you can't put them in a group that's less than you or not human, it's really tough. You know, and so people these days, social justice types, they're really ragging on Dr. Seuss. You know, they hate on Dr. Seuss now because Dr. Seuss, you know, was a racist and he insulted people a different color. No, actually, it's a little more complicated than that because what he was doing, he was a Jewish gentleman. He wasn't particularly fond of Hitler's ideology. He was trying to help, you know, the war effort, help, you know, people fight those guys, you know. And so, yeah, no, he didn't draw Nazis in a very sympathetic way. He didn't draw Japanese in a very sympathetic way. But it wasn't just Dr. Seuss. They banned most of these comics. You can't see them anymore. But Donald Duck wasn't very nice to the Japanese either. Neither was Bugs Bunny. Neither was, any of them. Warner Brothers, Disney. Because we had a united society that was going to help our boys go over there and kill a commie for your mommy, kill a Jap, kill Nazis. If you can't put them in that category, okay, and so what we've got now is a divided society where a certain segment of the population is trying to support the troops in the old-fashioned ways and hate on Muslims, okay, because we're in a war with fundamentalist Islam, right? So, go kill some Muslims for us. But then the other half of society is saying, no, that's not right. These are individual persons with dignity and respect, and Islam is religion of peace, and you shouldn't do that. Okay. But that puts a heck of a burden on that soldier that's supposed to respect the humanity of this person he has to kill. It's a lot easier to do it this way, okay? And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we're getting a lot more psychological problems, psychological conflict from this, because we're not putting them in agreed upon, socially unacceptable category that it's okay to kill. I wanted to give you a couple of, maybe I'll only give you one or two. I'll have to drop one of these. I'm going to drop the first case, and we'll drop the first case, and we'll go to the second. What I did was, I picked 3 cases that there is no way in the world that this is PTSD. But it is very clearly moral injury. Okay? I'll just do a brief summary of the first one, because it's actually kind of interesting. The first guy was one of the first cases I had as a psychology intern in Fort Bliss, California. And he was a retired Navy captain. And in Vietnam, he'd been stationed in Saigon. He was an officer doing intel and Navy stuff. And so he had a hooch there, he had an apartment. And this was very common, in that time. He had a live-in maid, and this was very common that time. She was a maid with benefits. And when you're having benefits with somebody you're not authorized to have benefits with, maybe you don't have quite the equipment that you need to prevent pregnancy, and so he got her pregnant. And he had to make a decision. He was married. Adultery is not good. Getting your maid pregnant is not good. I mean, this is the kind of thing that would end a career, right? So he could, help his kid, help the mother of the kid, or he could deny they existed and, PCS back onto America, which is what he chose to do, to protect his career. And so they're coming in with marital problems. They didn't have any kids. This was the only kid he had. Saigon fell, and they were not very happy with women who slept with Americans. They were not very happy with the mixed-race children. Things were very bad for those kids. And he felt real bad about it. And his wife just treated him terribly like a worm and insulted him all the time. And he just took it because it was a masochistic punishment. But he hadn't done anything to make amends for that. He hadn't done anything to, reach out to that person or see if they were still alive or anything like that. He was just a miserable, worthless person. And I didn't understand moral injury then. If I'd understand moral injury, maybe I could have done something to help those guys. But I saw them for a dozen sessions. They didn't make any progress. I'm sorry, I can't help you. This is exactly the plot of The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, the movie. And I saw that after I'd seen these guys. You should look at that. It's really interesting. He had knocked up a girl in Italy when he was fighting World War II. And then he became a loser until he dealt with that. And this, again, way before we had PTSD, or way before we had moral injury. This guy is really interesting to me. I was in the Bosnian War. The massacre of Srebrenica, there was a guy that really wanted to be another Hitler, and he wanted to kill all the Muslims, he wanted to kill all the Bosniaks, and he slaughtered 8,000 men and boys in Srebrenica. And there were Dutch peacekeepers there, and there's the guy that was in charge of the Dutch peacekeepers, and he was having a drink with Slobodan Milosevic, and this is about 2 weeks before the massacre happened. They weren't really ready to have a fight about it, and so they let them. And actually, a bunch of Bosniaks were hiding in their camp, and they pulled them out and they turned them over, and they were all killed. And so this one peacekeeper, he befriended a Bosnia guy, and Bosnia guy gave him all his money to help get his family out of Bosnia alive. So he had all this money, and instead of giving it to that family, he spent it on gambling, prostitutes, and liquor. And then 20 years later, he presents to the psychiatrist feeling guilty about it. Well, yeah, duh, right? Okay, but what is that? That's not PTSD. He was never in danger. He just did a really terrible thing. He did a really terrible thing. And it ruins your life. This one's a little more subtle, okay? Anybody been to Iraq? A couple guys? Okay. Camp Slayer, been there? Republican Guard headquarters, the Ba'ath Party headquarters, really their Congress was there, right? And so I was taking a tour there, and I came upon this place, this building that's been bombed out, and I didn't quite know what it was. And it was a nursery, it was a daycare center. And this little, about 5'2" Air Force E4 female came up to me and explained what had happened. She told me the story. And what she told me was that we had given Iraq 24 hours to surrender. I verified this part. We gave Iraq 24 hours to surrender, or else we were going to invade. And because we knew that what they do is they get together and they debate this and they decide whether to surrender or not. So 12 hours before the deadline, in the middle of the night, we sent a cruise missile into Ba'ath Party headquarters, and we blew them all up. Okay, so sneak attack, 12 hours before the deadline, but it was a decapitation strike. And at the same time we did the decapitation strike, we bombed the Republican Guard headquarters and daycare center. The Republican Guard kids were in. And the way this little E4 explained it was that we knew they wouldn't fight as well if their kids had just been killed. Now, I mean, it was a bombed out daycare center. And whether we targeted it or not, I don't know. But it was a crap thing to do. Particularly, if you win the war, Pearl Harbor's a terrible thing, I guess. But that was their Pearl Harbor. So the battle line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man. So, what are we doing to treat these people? And I had some people at the One Stop talk to me about moral injury. And what they said to me was, every time we send someone to these religious groups for moral injury, they come back worse. Why? Well, normal therapy really doesn't work very well for moral injury because most psychotherapy is aimed at correcting cognitive distortions. Like there's something wrong with your thinking. We're going to help your thinking. You got irrational beliefs, or you're making logical errors. Well, what if there's no distortion? What if the person knows very well what they did was wrong and the choices they made? Prolonged exposure is not going to help that, okay? Yes, I bombed the daycare center. It's not going to help. And I want to get at this one, man, this mythology of our heroes, okay? Our heroes. We're not heroes. There's very, very, very few heroes in the military. Sorry, guys. These well-meaning groups that are doing these moral injury treatments, they put pressure on people not to be honest. Okay, what's really bothering you? They can't tell you that in this group. So they have to lie about it. And just like we do when we talk to the VA, we make up a war story, and it checks their block, and okay, PTSD. Now they feel worse because not only have they have this moral injury thing going on, but they're lying about it to these church people, right? And so that's why I think they're getting worse. What you need to do if you want to work with people with moral injury is you need to accept them. And that's harder than you think, guys. It really is. It's harder than you think. I talked to a lot of VA therapists about this idea, and they said, I wouldn't work with somebody who did crimes. I wouldn't work with a bad person. I only work with victims. Okay, well, they're not going to talk to you. And if they did talk to you, that would be the worst person to talk to because you're going to freaking reject them. And that's what they need. They already think they're terrible people. Okay? What they need is somebody that they can tell what it is they did to, who is not going to reject them, who will accept that and say, well, that really sucks, but okay, what can we do now to make amends for that? What can we do to help fix that? And give them some kind of hope for redemption. So, if you want to get into this moral injury thing, you got to go in with your eyes open that you're going to hear some stuff that is disturbing. And your challenge is not to reaffirm their already existing opinion that they're terrible people. Okay, and I want to put a plug in for religion here. Because don't forget about religion. We need to triage people when they're coming in and find out what their spiritual beliefs are. Because if they really believe that there is an authority figure who is empowered by God to give them forgiveness, and that person gives them forgiveness, then, hey, that's much easier than what we have to do the other way, right? Okay, so, unless that religious person is going to say, no, I'm sorry, you're damned to hell, then that's another problem. We can't do that, okay? But if we have a religious person that can work through this, and you can do 10,000 Hail Marys and it'll work, then yeah, okay. But, many people today are not religious, or their experiences have caused them to reject the idea of God. So that's not particularly the path. That's why they have to come to the secular folks like us. What works is balancing the scales. It's right out of the 12 steps, absolutely. Make amends. Put it right as much as you can, okay? But I like the idea of karma. You've got to balance the scales. You put this much bad in the world, okay, now you feel like you're not worthy to be among decent people. You've got to put twice as much good on the other side of the scale, balance the scale, and you'll be redeemed. Okay? Give back. Delisa's got that on her shirt, on her one-stop shirt. It said, thank you for your service, we still need you. Okay, volunteering, doing something pro-social, helping. I'm going to wrap up here. I'm going to have a chaplain out in April who's doing a group in Philadelphia. And he has this idea that, people who have been to war are actually prophets, and that you can turn that weakness into a strength. And we're going to have a workshop in April, the Center of Excellence, about this. You guys are invited if you want to come. And I am a little worried about this one because he's a little bit social justice and he wants to blame society. And I really think you have to own it and you have to deal with it rather than just externalizing blame. But we'll see. Jordan Peterson, love the guy, rock star psychologist. He's got the #1 book on Amazon. He's selling out lectures for $100 a seat if you want to get down in the lower tier. But before that, I knew him before that, he was a Jungian psychologist, and he did this book, Naps and Meaning. And he has this opinion that a harmless man is not a good man, because there's no moral choice there. If you don't know you have the choice to be evil, it's not a moral choice. When you know you have the capacity for evil but choose to be good, that's a moral choice. So people who've been to war are closer to enlightenment because they know a truth. And it's better to have lived a truth than just learned about it in a book. And so this can be reframed as a cost, but as an ultimate benefit because you know your shadow. And you know everyone has one, but yours is under control. I always thought that was a weird biblical saying, the meek shall inherit the earth. And I got to credit him for actually going back to the Greek praeus, which actually means strength under control. Men who know how to use their swords but keep them sheathed. So that, men with strength but self-control shall inherit the earth, that actually makes a lot more sense to me as an idea, right? Okay, so acceptance, balance the scales, reframing this as a positive or a step toward enlightenment, I think is the path that we need to take when we're working with these people. So, we are starting a moral injury group at the Austin VA clinic, the workshop in April. We are also working with Brett Litz on an International Moral Injury Assessment Consortium, and I still really believe this is the next big thing. Because you don't have to have a Category A stressor that your life was in danger for you to be severely affected by work. It's absolutely unnecessary. Okay, no, I guess I can't do questions. I guess I'm just done. All right.